My name is Natalie Reeves, and I am 41 years old. 6 months ago, I sat in a family courtroom in Columbus, Ohio, while my own mother took the witness stand and told a judge I was an unfit mother. My father sat in the gallery behind her, nodding along, arms crossed, wearing the same disappointed expression he'd worn my entire life. My ex-husband's lawyer smiled like a shark who smelled blood in the water, and my two children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Lucas, were at home with a court-appointed supervisor, waiting to find out who they'd be living with for the rest of their childhood. I sat at the defendant's table, hands folded, heart pounding, watching the woman who raised me try to take my children away. But here's the thing about courtrooms. They don't care about performances. They care about evidence. And my parents had spent so many years performing that they forgot the cameras were always rolling. What happened next didn't just save my custody case. It ended my parents' relationship with my children permanently, by order of the court. Before we get into this, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Let me take you back. Not to the courtroom, not to the custody battle, but to a house in suburban Cleveland, 35 years ago, where a little girl learned that love in her family came with conditions. I was the second child, the unplanned one. My brother Kevin was born 3 years before me, and from the moment I arrived, I was measured against him. Kevin was the athlete. Kevin was the charmer. Kevin was the one my father took to baseball games while I stayed home with my mother, who reminded me constantly that raising 2 children was twice the work she'd signed up for. I don't remember a time when I felt wanted. There were no overt bruises, no screaming matches that the neighbors could hear. My parents were too careful for that. They were respected in our community. My father, a mid-level manager at a manufacturing company. My mother, a church volunteer who organized bake sales and smiled at everyone. Picture perfect from the outside. But inside that house, I was invisible. When Kevin got straight A's, there was a celebration dinner. When I got straight A's, my mother asked why I hadn't joined more extracurricular activities. When Kevin made the varsity team, my father took the day off work. When I won the regional spelling bee, my father forgot to come. He said he had a meeting. I found out later he'd taken Kevin to a car show 3 towns over. It wasn't abuse in the way most people understand it. It was erasure. Slow, methodical, constant erasure. I learned early that my role in the family was to need less, ask for nothing, and be grateful for whatever scraps of attention fell my way. I learned to make myself small, quiet, convenient. That conditioning would nearly cost me my children. I left home at 18. Scholarship to Ohio State. I studied accounting because it was practical, because it was stable, because it was the kind of career my parents couldn't criticize, though they certainly tried. Accounting? My mother said when I told her. That's so boring. Kevin's going into business management. Much more prestigious. Kevin dropped out after 2 years. I graduated summa cum laude. My parents didn't come to the ceremony. They said the drive was too long. Got a job at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, worked my way up to senior accountant, bought a small condo with a view of the river, made friends who actually seemed happy to see me. For the first time in my life, I felt like a person instead of an inconvenience. And then I met Derek. Derek Hollister was everything my parents would have approved of. Handsome, confident, from a good family. He worked in sales, made good money, drove a nice car. When I brought him home for Thanksgiving, my mother actually hugged me. My father shook his hand for a full 10 seconds. Finally, my mother whispered to me in the kitchen, "Someone we can be proud of." I should have run. That sentence should have been the red flag that sent me sprinting in the opposite direction. Instead, I felt something I'd been chasing my whole life. Approval. My parents were finally proud of something I'd done. I married Derek 14 months later. The wedding was beautiful, the marriage was not. Derek was charming in public and controlling in private. He monitored my spending. He questioned my friendships. He'd pick fights before social events, so I'd be too upset to go, then tell everyone I was antisocial. Classic isolation tactics, though I didn't have the vocabulary for it then. When I got pregnant with Emma, I thought things would change. They did. They got worse. Derek wanted a son. When the ultrasound showed a girl, he barely spoke to me for a week. After Emma was born, he held her once at the hospital, handed her back, and said, "Hopefully the next one." The next one was Lucas, a boy. Derek was thrilled. for about 3 months. Then he realized that babies require actual effort, and his interest evaporated. He was a father in title only, a name on a birth certificate, a man who showed up for family photos and disappeared for everything else. I raised those children alone, inside a marriage, inside a house that looked perfect from the outside. Sound familiar? If you've ever been in a situation where your family refused to hear your side, where the truth didn't matter because someone else's image was more important, drop a fire emoji in the comments. And if you think my parents are going to regret getting involved, type karma. I filed for divorce when Lucas was 4 and Emma was 6. Derek had started staying out late, sometimes not coming home at all. When I checked our bank account one morning, I found $12,000 missing. He'd been gambling, online poker, sports betting, a secret life funded by our savings. I confronted him. He denied it. I showed him the statements. He called me crazy. I told him I wanted a divorce. He laughed. "Good luck," he said. "No judge is going to give full custody to a woman who can barely keep it together." I didn't know what he meant then. I would find out soon enough. The divorce proceeding started civil and turned vicious within weeks. Derek hired an aggressive attorney, funded by his parents who had never liked me. His strategy was simple: destroy my credibility, paint me as an unstable mother, and win custody of the children he'd barely parented. He couldn't prove I was unfit, so he found people who would say it for him. My parents. I don't know exactly when Derek contacted them. My mother later claimed it was mutual concern for the grandchildren. My father said they'd had suspicions for years, but the truth was simpler. Derek offered them something they'd always wanted. Access to Kevin's children had dwindled after Kevin's own divorce. My kids were the only grandchildren they had regular contact with, and Derek promised them that if he won custody, they'd have unlimited visitation. All they had to do was testify that I was an unfit mother. They agreed. I found out 2 weeks before the hearing. My attorney called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Natalie, I need to prepare you for something. Your ex-husband's witness list includes Margaret and Donald Reeves, your parents." I remember exactly where I was standing. In my kitchen, Lucas's crayon drawing on the refrigerator, Emma's backpack hanging by the door, the smell of the coffee I'd just made. My parents were going to testify against me, in court, under oath, to take my children away. I put the phone down and sat on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes. I didn't cry. I was too shocked to cry. I just sat there, staring at the tile pattern, trying to understand how the people who raised me could do this. Then I got up. I made a list, and I started fighting back. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my life. I barely slept. I barely ate. Every spare moment was spent preparing for the hearing. My attorney, a woman named Grace Chen who'd been through her own custody battle years earlier, became my lifeline. She told me something I'll never forget. "Natalie, the truth is on your side. But truth alone doesn't win cases. Evidence does. Witnesses who can speak to your character do. We need to build a fortress around you so strong that nothing they say can penetrate it." So that's what we did. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Every school report that showed I was the one attending parent-teacher conferences. Every medical record that showed I was the one taking the kids to appointments. Every email from Derek's work colleagues confirming he was absent during family emergencies. Every bank statement showing I was the one paying for childcare while he gambled our savings away. But the most important evidence came from an unexpected source: my parents themselves. You see, my mother was meticulous about documentation. She kept everything: cards, letters, photographs, receipts. It was a form of control. She wanted to remember exactly what everyone owed her. And years ago, she'd made a mistake. She'd sent me a letter. It was after Emma's first birthday. I'd asked my parents to contribute to a college fund instead of buying toys. My mother sent a check and a 3-page letter explaining exactly how disappointed she was in how I was raising my daughter. Too permissive, too soft. Not enough structure. "If you keep parenting this way," she wrote, "those children will turn out just as directionless as you were." I'd kept that letter. I don't know why. Maybe because seeing her cruelty in writing made it real in a way her spoken words never did. My attorney's eyes lit up when I showed her. "This is a pattern," she said. "This shows long-standing contempt. This undermines any claim that their testimony comes from genuine concern." But we needed more. We needed to prove that my parents' involvement wasn't about protecting my children, it was about controlling access to them. I have to pause here. What do you think we found when we started digging? Option A, my parents had been coordinating with Derek for months. Option B, my parents had made similar accusations before. Option C, my parents had a secret agenda involving money. Drop your answer in the comments. The answer was A and B, and something even worse? Grace hired a private investigator. It sounds dramatic, but in custody cases involving parental alienation or coordinated attacks, it's not uncommon. The investigator, a former police detective named Marcus, started by pulling communication records and building a timeline. What he found was damning. My parents had been in contact with Derek for over a year, starting before I even filed for divorce. They'd been meeting for coffee, exchanging emails. My mother had sent Derek a detailed list of incidents that supposedly demonstrated my unfitness as a mother. The incidents were fabricated, exaggerated, twisted beyond recognition. One incident claimed I'd left the children alone in a parking lot. The truth, I'd walked 10 feet to return a shopping cart while they sat in the locked car with the windows down. On a mild day, my father had been there. He'd seen exactly what happened. Another incident claimed I'd had a mental breakdown and screamed at Emma in public. The truth, Emma had a tantrum at a family dinner, and I'd firmly told her that screaming was not acceptable. My mother had called it disturbing at the time. Now it was evidence of instability. But the worst discovery was something I'd never known about. 3 years earlier, my parents had contacted Child Protective Services, anonymously. They'd reported concerns about my parenting, allegations of neglect, emotional volatility, unsafe home conditions. They found nothing. The case was closed as unfounded. I never knew it happened. My parents never mentioned it. The report had been sealed. Until now, Marcus found it through court records connected to my address. Grace subpoenaed the file, and there it was, in black and white. My own parents had tried to have my children taken away 3 years before the custody battle even started. They hadn't acted out of concern. They'd been planning this for years. When I read the CPS report, sitting in Grace's office, hands shaking, coffee going cold, I felt something inside me crack. Not break. Crack. Like ice before it gives way. My parents had never loved me. I'd always known that, somewhere deep down. But I'd believed, foolishly, that they loved my children, that whatever resentment they held toward me wouldn't extend to Emma and Lucas. I was wrong. They didn't love my children. They wanted to own them, to control them the way they controlled me, to shape them into the grandchildren they felt entitled to, regardless of what I wanted, regardless of what was best for Emma and Lucas. This wasn't grandparental concern. This was war, and I was done being a casualty. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next part of the story is where everything comes crashing down. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in November. The leaves had turned. The air was sharp. I remember driving to the courthouse thinking, this is either the end of everything or the beginning of something new. Grace had prepared me for every scenario. We'd rehearsed my testimony. We'd organized our evidence into binders so thick they looked like textbooks. We'd lined up witnesses: Emma's teacher, Lucas's pediatrician, 3 neighbors who'd watched me parent my children every single day. Derek's side had my parents, and whatever lies they'd prepared to tell. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, a judge's bench that seemed too large for the woman sitting behind it, the Honorable Patricia Weatherstone, a veteran family court judge with a reputation for seeing through nonsense. Derek sat at the opposing table with his lawyer, looking smug. My parents sat in the gallery behind him, dressed in their Sunday best, wearing expressions of practiced concern. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. The hearing began with opening statements. Derek's lawyer painted me as emotionally unstable, financially irresponsible, and unable to provide a stable home. Grace painted Derek as an absent father who'd abandoned his children emotionally and financially, now seeking custody out of spite rather than love. Then came the witnesses. Emma's teacher testified that I was the only parent who attended school events, responded to communications, and showed up during emergencies. I've never met Mr. Hollister, she said. I wouldn't recognize him if he walked in the door. Lucas's pediatrician testified that I'd brought both children to every appointment, kept them current on vaccinations, and showed deep attentiveness to their health needs. When asked about Derek, she checked her records and said, "There's no indication the father has ever attended an appointment. My neighbors testified that they saw me with my children every day, at the park, walking to school, playing in the yard." They described Derek as the man who sometimes came home late and left early. Then it was time for Derek's witnesses. My mother took the stand. Margaret Reeves, 67 years old, silver hair pinned back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked like someone's sweet grandmother, the kind of woman who bakes cookies and tells bedtime stories. The judge didn't know what she really was. Not yet. Derek's lawyer approached her gently. "Mrs. Reeves, thank you for being here. I know this must be difficult." My mother nodded, dabbing at eyes that weren't wet. "It is. But those children are more important than my comfort. Can you describe your relationship with your daughter?" "I love Natalie," my mother said. "I always have. But I've had concerns about her parenting for years. She's fragile, emotionally. She doesn't handle stress well, and the children have suffered for it." "Can you give us examples?" My mother launched into her rehearsed list. The parking lot incident. The public breakdown. A time I'd allegedly forgotten to pick Lucas up from daycare, which never happened. A time I'd supposedly lost my temper and thrown a dish, also fiction. She spoke with such conviction, such practiced sorrow, that I could see some people in the courtroom believing her. This was what she did. This was what she'd always done. Performed concern while inflicting damage. When Derek's lawyer finished, Grace stood up. "Mrs. Reeves," she said, her voice calm. "You mentioned you've had concerns about your daughter's parenting for years. Is that correct? So concerned, in fact, that 3 years ago you filed an anonymous report with Child Protective Services, correct?" My mother's face flickered. "Just a fraction. I don't know what you're referring to." Grace approached the bench and handed the judge a document. "Your Honor, this is the CPS report filed in 2021, traced through court records to a phone number registered to Margaret and Donald Reeves." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Reeves?" Grace continued. "Did you or did you not contact CPS 3 years ago with allegations against your own daughter?" My mother's composure cracked. Just slightly. "I was concerned. The report was made out of concern for the children." "And what did CPS find when they investigated?" I don't recall the outcome." Grace handed another document to the judge. "The case was closed as unfounded. No evidence of neglect, no evidence of abuse, no evidence of any unsafe conditions." She turned back to my mother. "So you made serious allegations against your daughter, anonymously, and those allegations were found to be baseless. And now 3 years later, you're in this courtroom making similar allegations. Is that correct?" My mother's lips pressed together. "I'm trying to protect my grandchildren. Are you? Or are you trying to gain access to them by removing their mother from the equation?" "Objection," Derek's lawyer said. "Badgering the witness." "Overruled," the judge said, watching my mother with new interest. "I'd like to hear the answer." My mother looked at the judge, at me, at the lawyer. She had nowhere to hide. "I love those children," she said finally, "and I believe they'd be better off with their father." Grace nodded. "You believe that, despite the fact that every piece of evidence shows their mother is their primary caregiver, despite the fact that their father has attended 0 medical appointments and 0 school events, despite the fact that your previous allegations were investigated and dismissed, you still believe that." My mother said nothing. Grace returned to our table and picked up the letter, the one my mother had written after Emma's first birthday. "Mrs. Reeves, do you recognize this letter?" My mother's face went pale. "I'd like to read an excerpt for the court," Grace said. "This letter was written by Mrs. Reeves to her daughter approximately 7 years ago. Quote, 'If you keep parenting this way, those children will turn out just as directionless as you were. You've always needed guidance, Natalie. You've always been lost without someone telling you what to do. These children deserve better than a mother who never grew up.'" Grace set the letter down. "Mrs. Reeves, does this sound like the words of a concerned grandmother? Or does this sound like the words of someone who has never believed her daughter was capable of anything?" My mother's mouth opened, closed. Her performance was crumbling. "I was trying to help," she whispered. "By telling your daughter she's directionless? By filing anonymous reports with child services? By coordinating with her ex-husband for over a year to build a case against her?" "Objection." Derek's lawyer said weakly. Foundation. I have phone records and email correspondence, Grace said. Would the court like to see them? The judge nodded. Grace submitted the evidence. Emails between my mother and Derek. Text messages coordinating their stories, a chain going back 14 months. The judge reviewed the documents for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked at my mother. Mrs. Reeves, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. At any point in the last 14 months, did you coordinate your testimony with Mr. Hollister or his legal team? My mother hesitated. The courtroom held its breath. We discussed our concerns. She said finally, "That's all. Did you discuss what you would say in this courtroom?" Another pause. Longer this time. We may have gone over some details. The judge's expression hardened. Mrs. Reeves, coordinating testimony is a serious matter. It undermines the integrity of these proceedings. I'm going to note this for the record and take it under consideration. My mother was dismissed from the stand. She walked back to the gallery on shaking legs. My father wouldn't look at her. Then it was his turn. Donald Reeves, 69 years old, gray hair thinning, the same stern face I'd grown up fearing. He took the oath and sat down like a man who expected to be obeyed. Grace didn't give him that satisfaction. Mr. Reeves, were you aware that your wife filed a CPS report against your daughter 3 years ago? Yes. Did you participate in filing that report? I supported it. And were you aware that the report was found to be unfounded? We disagreed with that finding. I see. And were you also aware of the email coordination between your wife and Mr. Hollister over the past 14 months? My father's jaw tightened. I knew they were in contact. Did you participate in those conversations? Some of them. Did you discuss testimony strategy? We discussed our concerns. Grace pulled out another document. Mr. Reeves, I have an email here dated September 15th of this year. It's from your email address to Mr. Hollister. Quote, "We need to focus on the parking lot incident. It makes her look neglectful." Don't let her lawyer redirect. She looked up. Does that sound like discussing concerns? Or does that sound like coaching testimony? My father's face went red. I was trying to make sure the truth came out. The truth? The parking lot incident, as described by your wife, was you walking 10 feet away with the children in a locked car for less than 60 seconds. You were there. You saw what happened. And you agreed to let your wife describe it as abandonment? My father said nothing. Mr. Reeves, I'm going to ask you the same question the judge asked your wife. Did you coordinate your testimony with Mr. Hollister's legal team? My father looked at Derek's lawyer, at my mother in the gallery. Then he looked at me. And for one moment, just one, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but recognition. The recognition that he'd gone too far, that this had spiraled beyond what he'd expected. We discussed the case, he said quietly. That's all I'm willing to say. The judge made a note. My father was dismissed, and the courtroom went silent. The judge called a 30-minute recess. I sat at the table, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. Grace squeezed my shoulder. You did good, she said. The truth came out. Now we wait. When court resumed, Judge Weatherstone didn't waste time. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, she said. I've heard testimony from multiple witnesses, and I've observed some deeply troubling behavior from individuals who should know better. She looked at Derek. Mr. Hollister, you've asked this court to grant you primary custody of your children. But the evidence shows that you have been, at best, a peripheral presence in their lives. You have attended no medical appointments, no school events, no parent-teacher conferences. Meanwhile, you've accumulated significant gambling debts that you hid from your wife, depleting family savings that could have gone toward your children's future. Derek's smug expression faltered. More troubling, the judge continued, is the coordinated effort to discredit the mother of your children. The evidence shows that you have been working with Margaret and Donald Reeves for over a year to build a case against Miss Reeves. This coordination included the fabrication and exaggeration of incidents, the coaching of testimony, and an apparent attempt to use the grandparents' access to the children as leverage. She turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, I am profoundly disappointed in your conduct. You are the maternal grandparents of these children. Your role should be to support your daughter and her family, not to undermine them. Instead, you filed a baseless CPS report 3 years ago. You spent 14 months coordinating with your son-in-law to destroy your daughter's credibility. And you took the stand in this courtroom and delivered testimony that was, at minimum, misleading. And at worst, perjurious. My mother looked like she might be sick. Grandparental rights, the judge said, are not automatic. They are earned through a genuine relationship with the children and respect for the parental bond. You have demonstrated neither. She shuffled her papers. Here is my ruling. I held my breath. Primary physical custody of Emma and Lucas Hollister is awarded to their mother, Natalie Reeves. Mr. Hollister will have supervised visitation every other weekend until he completes a parenting course and demonstrates financial stability. I exhaled, but the judge wasn't finished. As for Margaret and Donald Reeves, based on the evidence of their coordinated effort to separate these children from their mother, their history of baseless allegations, and their willingness to prioritize their own access over the children's well-being, I am issuing a no-contact order. They are prohibited from contacting the children directly or indirectly. They are prohibited from approaching the children at school, at home, or in any public setting. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges. My mother made a sound, something between a gasp and a cry. The judge looked at her. Mrs. Reeves, you called your grandchildren's mother directionless. You called her incapable. You tried to have her children taken away. And when that didn't work, you conspired with her ex-husband to finish the job. The only thing you've accomplished is proving that you cannot be trusted with these children. Ms. Reeves, I'm sorry you had to go through this. No mother should have to defend herself against her own parents. But you've demonstrated today that you are exactly the kind of parent your children need. Patient, prepared, and willing to fight for them. This court is confident that Emma and Lucas will thrive in your care. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. I didn't look at my parents as I left the courtroom. I didn't look at Derek. I walked straight out, down the hall, through the doors, and into the November air. Then I sat on a bench outside the courthouse and cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from exhaustion, from the release of carrying a weight I'd been hauling since I was 5 years old, when I first realized my parents would never love me the way they loved my brother. Grace found me 10 minutes later. She sat beside me without speaking. When I finally looked up, she smiled. You did it, she said. They can't hurt you anymore. She was right, and she was wrong. The legal battle was over, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. The no-contact order meant my children would never see my parents again, at least not until they turned 18 and could make that choice themselves. Part of me felt guilty about that. Emma had loved going to Grandma's house. Lucas had loved my father's model trains. But then I remembered the CPS report, the coordinated testimony, the years of being told I was worthless, directionless, disposable. My parents didn't love those children. They wanted to possess them. And possession is not love. I drove home that afternoon to find Emma and Lucas waiting by the window. The court supervisor had told them nothing, just that Mommy would be home soon. When I walked through the door, they ran to me like I'd been gone for years instead of hours. I held them so tight I thought I might never let go. Is everything okay, Mommy? Emma asked. I looked at her face, so earnest, so trusting, so full of questions she was too young to understand. Everything's okay, I said. You're staying with me. Forever. What about Daddy? Daddy will visit sometimes. When he's ready. What about Grandma and Grandpa? I paused. This was the question I'd been dreading. Grandma and Grandpa aren't going to be visiting for a while, I said carefully. They made some choices that weren't good for our family. And sometimes, when people make bad choices, there are consequences. Like when I hit Lucas and you took away my tablet, I almost laughed. Yes, baby. Like that. Except, this is for grown-ups. She nodded, satisfied with the explanation. Lucas had already lost interest and wandered off to find his trucks. Children are resilient, more resilient than we give them credit for. They don't need perfect families. They need one person who loves them unconditionally, who shows up every day, who fights for them when no one else will. I am that person. 6 months have passed since the hearing. Derek completed his parenting course and started having supervised visits. He's trying, awkwardly, inconsistently, but trying. The gambling is supposedly under control. I don't know if I believe him, But I believe in second chances for fathers who make an effort. The children deserve to know their dad, even if he'll never win any parenting awards. My parents have not contacted me. I've heard through relatives that my mother had a breakdown after the hearing, that my father blames me for destroying the family, that they've told everyone who will listen that I turned their grandchildren against them. They don't mention the CPS report. They don't mention the coordinated testimony. They don't mention the email where my father coached Derek on how to make me look like a bad mother. Some people will never accept accountability. They will go to their graves believing they were the victims. You cannot argue with that. You can only protect yourself from it. I've started therapy. Real therapy with a counselor who specializes in adult children of emotionally abusive parents. I'm learning words for things I couldn't name before. Narcissistic injury, scapegoating, conditional love. I'm learning that the emptiness I felt as a child wasn't because I was unlovable. It was because I was raised by people who were incapable of loving unconditionally. I'm learning that I can break the cycle. Emma is 9 now. Lucas is 7. They're thriving. They have friends and hobbies and bedrooms full of toys they don't need. They have a mother who tells them she loves them every single day, not because they earned it, but because they exist. That's all it takes. Existence. You don't have to be perfect to deserve love. You don't have to achieve anything. You just have to be. My parents never understood that. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe something was broken inside them long before I was born. I don't know, and I've stopped trying to figure it out. What I know is this: I spent 40 years being told I wasn't enough, not smart enough, not accomplished enough, not the child they wanted. And then I sat in a courtroom and watched my parents try to take the only thing I'd ever done right, raising my children, and use it against me. They failed, not because the judge was sympathetic, not because I had a good lawyer, but because the truth has a way of surfacing, eventually, inevitably, like a body buried in shallow ground. My parents testified against me for custody. They thought they would win. They thought I would crumble the way I always had, fold the way they'd trained me to fold. Instead, a judge looked at the evidence, listened to the witnesses, and saw exactly who they were, and she banned them. That's not revenge. That's not karma. That's just what happens when you spend a lifetime performing goodness without ever actually being good. My name is Natalie Reeves. I am 41 years old. I am a mother of 2 beautiful children who call me every morning and every night just to say they love me. And I am done being invisible.